Let me introduce you to our panel. We have Ryan Beagan, Vice President of Virtual Production at Warner Brothers. Ryan has helped develop the virtual production process for games, including Tomb Raider, and films such as Jungle Book, Ready Player One, and Black Adam. He started at Warner Media in 2020 and has overseen the launch of V-Stage in August of 2021 in partnership with HBO's House of the Dragon. We also have James Whitlam, Managing Director, Episodic at Framestore. James has worked in VFX and as a producer for the past 25 years on some big films and TV series, including Mad Max Fury Road, Paddington 2, and now HBO's BBC's series, His Dark Materials. He was instrumental in building Rising Sun Pictures into a top visual effects vendor and is now overseeing Episodic at Framestore, including Disney Plus series WandaVision. We have Lisa Gray, executive producer at Build Studios. Lisa is an award-winning executive producer and content creator across both television and interactive media technologies, working primarily in the UK, US, and Australia. She's been working with London-based virtual production facility Mars Volume, run by Build Studios, as a VP producer supporting TV, advertising, music, film, and gaming, and has embraced virtual production. We also have Angus Bickerton, visual effects supervisor. Angus began his visual effects journey as a motion control cameraman on projects like BBC's Red Dwarf series, and has quickly risen to becoming an internationally renowned visual effects supervisor, working on big projects like Ron Howard's The Da Vinci Code, HBO's series The Band of Brothers, The Chronicles of Narnia, and Matthew Vaughan's Kingsman: The Golden Circle. So let's kick off with some questions. Let's start with the obvious question. Tell me a bit about virtual production, how it works, and why it's so important, such a game changer. Ryan, do you want to kick us off there?
Sure. So virtual production, has been, it's an all-encompassing term that has been around for a while, but I think currently the sort of game changer is real-time graphics, which was always sort of the goal. That was the goal when we were doing movies with motion capture. That was the goal when we were trying to pre-visualize a shot, and now with an LED wall and a game engine, you can actually achieve a final image behind your subject, and that has really sort of opened up a world of possibilities, as has the ability to have an actor 100 miles away in a motion capture suit and a director seeing that subject right on their screen. That's really sort of kept people moving the last year and a half.
Yeah, it must be, I was going to say actually, with COVID times, that's probably a very useful and beneficial sort of tool. Having to, you can work in different parts of the world, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, I have seen on my Zoom screen 6 different actors in different locations, all in their sort of bedrooms or living rooms or wherever in an Xsense mocap suit, but then the director is looking at one completed version of that on their monitor. And that really, that kept people looking and developing their scenes. And that's really the other added benefit of the virtual production process as a whole, is it affords you the opportunity to get more iterations. It's almost a simulation for the filmmaking process. So all the VR scouting and virtual camera work that you do in pre-production, you've already seen this scene play out before, and you're sort of executing on that vision.
And James, what's your experience with virtual production?
For the past year, we've been working with Netflix and the producers of Dark, which was a Netflix show in Germany, on a show called 1899 at Babelsberg. So we have helped design, construct and operate Europe's biggest LED volume to date out there with Ari and Faber and a bunch of other partners. Doing the entire thing through COVID times has allowed us to create an 8-part series, which is set in multiple locations on the water and around different landscapes, all within one environment on the set. So it literally would not have been feasible to make that show in a traditional way without the volume.
And Lisa, your experience on smaller projects, perhaps?
Sure. My experience is I've come from, as you said as you explained in my bio, I've come from a traditional television and filmmaking background, and my experience is the post people in my world coming way more involved in the shooting and the production a lot earlier, and then the opportunities of what that opens up. when we were just waiting to come on stage, conversations between visual effects artists and art department, conversations between all these people that were often segmented in different parts of the processes are happening earlier. And opportunities are happening. The technology's come a long way, especially in the last year, as we were forced into lockdown and forced into more virtual scenarios, and that's really shown the benefit, and I think has really opened up for all different types of media genres to get on board and really experience what virtual production is.
You're absolutely right. Preparation is key, isn't it, Angus, in terms of collaboration between the team members and obviously preparing how to use the technology properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been learning all about that, really, in the past sort of 9 months on House of the Dragon, which is what we're currently working on, Ryan and myself are currently working on. And I've been sort of had my hand held through a lot of the process by Ryan and some of the team, because Ryan's set up the whole facility at Warner Brothers Leavesden for us. It's a similar sort of setup to the one that I think James is involved with as well. And yes, it has been a learning process, definitely. We have a traditional art department who have had to learn how to work with the volume as well. And we've had the good fortune to have a good schedule and a good lead time. We were talking about this earlier on. We have a really well-run show with prepared scripts, which do alter as you go along, but we largely have the shape of the series. And with that, our showrunners were able to decide to use the volume. They were able to use their heft to get a volume made in the UK for this show. And we've used the show as a launching pad to get to try out the technology, with the intention to use it a lot more in the future. But we're sort of dipping our toes into it. And so consequently, yes, it has been an interesting collaboration between art department, virtual art department, and in our case, our post-production house is creating the environment to go onto the screens. So they're having to do all the work in advance rather than in post, as they would do normally. And so, yeah, it's been fascinating to learn the quirks and the different ways of doing things, definitely.
So extending from that, Ryan, can you tell me a bit about the setup at Warner Brothers Studios Leavesden in terms of the virtual production stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So V-Stage, as it stands today, which also we were quite fortunate that we were placed onto a stage conveniently named V-Stage. But so the setup was answering a question of why would Warner Brothers sort of build a stage, and that is not to sort of compete in this larger market where there's new stages coming up everywhere all the time, and what the economics of that mean for any given production is a really complicated question. We wanted to create a place that was an opportunity for better creative outcomes and make that available to as many productions as possible. So when we designed it, we wanted to make it as big as possible and as flexible as possible. So it's a very large space. It takes a lot of time to just fill it with physical set. And with 8-meter high walls and a dynamic ceiling that affords you the ability to either rig things up there or create a seamless perspective larger than you would have sort of originally planned for. All of that was with a mind to, I don't know what the rule book is. I don't know what one production or another production is going to do. But if we are going to provide a space for our future films and our future series, we want to create a big, large, bold space that's available to whoever wants to challenge us on what are the rules, which House of the Dragon certainly has, with flame and everything else that they could throw at it.
And is it open to all productions of all sizes? I mean, can you tailor the equipment, the technology to suit any project?
You absolutely can. I think, this space is sort of aimed or geared for the larger scoped projects, just because of the sheer, it's the equivalent of over 100 million pixels. It's 26K resolution in the wraparound, so you really do need to have a bold project. That said, the equipment will work in a in a thumbnail, it'll still do its job. And so if it's available, we want to sort of also find opportunities for the gaps. There will be gaps all the time, and that's the thing about virtual production. It's not a set that's been sat there for months on end. When a set moves out, someone else could move something quickly in, nimbly, do 3 shots, and get out of there in sort of an efficient manner.
To add to this, if you don't mind, what we're finding in the lower budget productions has been the importance of the experimentation. Yeah. So at Mars, in the last couple of months, we've started this service called Life on Mars, where we have our volume already in there, and we actually have clients come in and share a problem they've got. It could be, we've got this TV commercial, an ad, a car one that we want to shoot all around the world. Could we all do it in a volume? And so with the right brief and the setup, we bring them in for 90 minutes and we get them to play. I absolutely see I agree about the opportunities with like virtual filming with a volume, but I also see now, I definitely see, especially in the last couple of weeks, the importance of actually going into a volume and really exploring what the potential is. And also just leaving your assumptions at the door. It's been really interesting watching a lot of really quite profound documentary directors or gamers, come in with what they think they need to do to actually make something great. But it's definitely learning, as you were saying earlier, the art form of learning how to speak to other creatives, and also bringing in, some of the staff we've got have worked on bigger feature films, some have worked on games, and just together going, okay, this is a problem we're trying to solve. And like we all said, the rule book hasn't been written yet. So, it's about being open to that for the solution.
I think there's potentially like a misconception out there that, a volume, when you look at it, it's such like astounding technology that you're only really going to be able to like use it or access it if you're doing a big visual effects film, if you're doing a Marvel film, or you're doing House of the Dragon or a big series that has a lot of visual effects. But actually, like the most successful part of it is just the drama. It's the in-camera visual effects. It's not designed for action. You don't get big action sequences on a volume. Like what you get from the value of a volume, I think, is not going out and having to build all of those like having to build ballrooms or this or that, like interiors or exterior locations, go to exterior locations to be able to have them all in that space. But it's about drama, which is where it's the most successful. Actually adding visual effects to stuff that's been shot in a volume is a factor harder than if it was shot like on a green screen or on location, because you can't track it. It's like there's all sorts of things that are gotchas in there that make it quite difficult. So I think that there's going to be a bit of not an explosion, but I think that it will tend to go in a direction over the next couple of years of a lot of mid-level sort of drama-oriented shows that say, actually, if we're setting ourselves up for like 2 or 3 seasons and we build these assets in a virtual art department up front, we can actually save a lot of money over the long run just doing something that might be like a period drama type show. It doesn't necessarily need to be Thor.
Can you give me a sense of the creative process? Like, how does this work in practice, virtual production? So on House of the Dragon, for example, how does it work from day one? What's the planning process?
As I say, first of all, we had our script sorted out in the first place. Then our excellent showrunners basically said, right, we want to use the volume. We want to use it appropriately. We want to use it for the right thing. And because we also wanted to use this series as an experimentation process, we selected. We've actually got about 5 major scenes which we're doing in the volume, and 2 are interior, 3 are exterior, 2 are interior. And then again, and this is where perhaps we're extremely fortunate, is I nominally set a sort of a pre-production schedule. And gave ourselves 14 weeks from set design. So that, in other words, instead of having to build the set in post, which we would normally do, and would also take some considerable time if it's a complicated set, even if it's a CG set, we have to from the moment of getting a signed-off design, incidentally, I did set it to quite a long schedule in order, knowing that things would change. From a sign-off on a design, we have to figure out what's going to practically be built in the volume, what's going to be actually on the screens. Then we went to our post house, which in this case is a company called Pixamondo, and they started to build the asset that would go on the screen. And that asset is a combination of some CG build, some photogrammetry of real environments, a combination of assets, basically. So we actually had to go out and scan some locations. And then, and admittedly, this was quite a healthy, long period to be able to do this in. We also had to learn and how to talk to the director of that particular episode and the DOP of that particular episode, and liaise with them, because now they can actually start to say how they want the scene to feel, what they want the lighting to be like in the scene as well. So it's not just set construction, you also want to talk about the mood of the scene. And, as Greg, one of the directors, said, this is an opportunity to be able to shoot sunset all day. So we can set it at a perfect moment in time and shoot it all day, rather than have that magic hour or magic half an hour even.
It's quite a change from green screen, isn't it?
It is, yes. And
involving process.
And I was joking about it earlier, is that as a visual effects supervisor previously, when we shot green screen, yes, there's a lot of nervousness about, the green spill all over the set. But I, as the supervisor on the set, tend to go, don't worry, we're going to add everything in later. Whereas now, suddenly, we have to be prepared with the environment on the set on the day, just as the art department does. So we need the lead time to build the environment, just as the art department does. Yes, and it makes it a little bit more live suddenly as well, a little bit more interactive, which is fun. That actually gives you a bit of a buzz.
And Ryan, how do you go about adapting the studio to make sure that it works for the production?
So that has been the sort of key question of how do we make it flexible enough that we're not saying no all the time. That was really sort of what we were trying to do, was say that, tell us what your scene is, what your challenges are, and let's try to solve what that is. And so, whether it, when Angus says mood, one of those things is, this is a series that does not sort of have a lamp that turns on. It's fire that provides the light on an interior. And that was sort of didn't think about that. How do we solve that? And having an approach that was quickly available, rather than sort of, I think a lot of volume talk and sort of what they might be designed for becomes a bit of like a glass house that you're walking into, where everybody's asking what are the rules, and like, I don't want to touch or break anything. And we're trying to very much make it just like the soundstage that's next door, that is 4 walls that you're renting, and you're doing your work, whatever you need to do. And so that's what we're trying to make at V Stages. It's another stage where just come with your ideas, come with your creativity, and we will adapt that space for your needs.
And just quickly, I'm curious to know, in terms of the LED walls and the camera sort of adjusting to it, how does that actually work in practice?
Well, again, one of the benefits of our show, I think, is we have a sort of a house style to the cinematography. We're shooting on Alexa LF and Alexa 65, which means larger sensor. We shoot generally around about 2.8, and that larger sensor combined with that stop means a slightly shallower depth of field. That helps. That's always a good thing. It helps a little bit with shooting on LED screens. I heard going into the show lots of talk about, getting moire pattern interference patterns on the screen as the screen resolution matched the camera resolution. I think we've only had that in very, very rare instances where we've gone through focus or something like that. But Ryan's team has basically calibrated the space. We've been very fortunate that we've had the show and the space dedicated to us for this past 6 months. And Ryan's team has effectively calibrated to those cameras, really, haven't you?
Yeah, and that, so to the not seeing a moire pattern or the color being correctly calibrated, that goes back to the idea that, we're not there to film the screen. So I think like when you first walk into a space, your eye, especially when it's as big as V Stage, we can't render full resolution everywhere on that wraparound. So it gets optimized for where the camera looks. But in addition to that, we are always sort of looking for a large format camera with subjects that are far enough away that nobody ever reminds themselves that, yes, if you were to put the camera right up next to it, you would see a moire pattern, you would have light spill and interaction. In a space this big, it really becomes more of a backdrop, and it's all about filming what you're there to film, which is your actors doing a scene of drama, a scene, the background is sort of, it's at a permanent sunset that whole time, but it becomes less about that and more about the sort of scene that's playing out.
Are you doing multi-camera?
We are, yes.
Yeah.
And that was one of our big concerns at the beginning. Mm-hmm. The show is a multi-camera show. We tend to shoot pretty much with a minimum of 3 cameras. And the concern was obviously the setup. We can track more than 1 camera, but you only really want to have the high resolution render for on the screen for 1 camera. So our concern was, with a series that uses multiple cameras to get the coverage that it always wants. Would we be able to get B and C cameras in?
Because you end up with like overlapping frustrums on the screen, right? And which is a...
So we've concentrated basically on just having 1 frustrum.
Right.
And then...
Just explain briefly what that is, just so everyone...
Well, I'll hand over to Ryan.
Sure. So there's a motion capture system at many of these stages of some form that's tracking the known position of the camera. And so if you were to be in that space, if you look through the camera, you see no effect. But if you actually see, if you're watching the wall and not through the lens of the camera, you'll see the parallax and perspective of the, so instead of a scenic backing that you might have on a show years ago, the image will actually change based on the perspective of the camera.
You know what it's like? It's like when you see those street artists who are doing chalk drawings on the ground that have got perspective, and from most angles it just looks skewed and weird, but if you come around to exactly the right angle, there's perfect depth, and that's basically what a frustrum is.
Those are the best moments actually. Is when your camera sort of tilts up or does an extreme angle, and outside, if you're looking at externally, the perspective is weirdly distorted, particularly when it goes up onto the ceiling. Yet through the camera, the perspective, it all looks correct. Yeah.
And Lisa, what about on the smaller budget projects? I mean, is the tech and process different?
Yes and no. So the tracking, the LED, all that's absolutely absolutely the same. But it's just a matter of really making sure that your processes are pretty streamlined. We always do testing before we go into shoot. That's super key. Not just because we can't emphasize enough that we're all learning at the same time, but also especially if it's a client that's going to a volume for the same time, and understanding exactly what we've all been talking about in terms of walking into the space and understanding that what they're seeing on the screen is not necessarily what's going to be seen on the camera. So, and like what Ryan was talking about, we make it really, we are very, very conscious of making sure that the space, that the studio that we've got at Mars is really, really comfortable and really, really familiar for people who are trying this for the first time. And then it's basically a smaller version of what everyone else has talked about, but very possible.
And is it very much, as you touched on there, a testing ground? I mean, it's early days, isn't it, James, still? So are people still learning and learning?
It's like you're here to see the experts talk about virtual production.
Yeah, we were having a laugh about that.
None of us really know what we're doing. No, it's very much about figuring it out as we go along. This is for a lot of us. It's first or second time that we're doing big shows like this. And there's an enormous amount of goodwill in the industry. There's a lot of knowledge sharing that's going on. which is helping us all push forward, because the most important thing for us as an industry is that filmmakers don't get scared by this process, that studios don't have a bad experience where they feel like they've wasted money. You want to try to, in a very short space of time, I think, get the whole industry like working in a standardized way with a standardized sort of hierarchy and naming structure, and things are going to happen. I think like over the next couple of years, you're going to see expectations on productions. We're always going to be at the mercy of scripts being written and not having enough pre-production time. One way of solving that is to not use one virtual art department, right? One way of solving that is to go to multi-vendor, like you would if you're trying to get a big visual effects show done. You go to like 6 or 7 vendors because no one vendor could get it done in the time frame you've got. It might be the same with pre-production, where you need multiple virtual art departments feeding in to shows, and I know this is already happening. There's a couple of shows that are shooting right now. I know one show that's shooting in the UK that has 4 companies feeding in as four different virtual art departments feeding into the virtual production team on set, which in a world where there is no standardization yet is really scary and very difficult for those filmmakers who are on set receiving all of that material and trying to keep consistency across the show. So we're all figuring that out as we go along, but we're talking to each other.
Absolutely, and we can't say enough. Come see us as early as possible, even when you're dreaming up the idea, even when you're writing the script, and talk to us about how we can help solve the problems of that you're finding on understanding what you want to capture and what your vision is. I was lucky enough to bump into a friend of mine, and I was telling her about how I'm working in this space now, and she's an indie feature film producer, and she was like, I don't think it's my thing. And I was telling her about we're talking to a feature filmmaker at the moment about filming 80% of his feature in a volume, and the reason why he's making that decision is because he wants a really concentrated, protected space for his actors to be able to really concentrate on their performance. And it seems like it's, the more and more he talks to us as the script's being developed, then the more opportunities we can give in terms of how you can capture stuff and open not just the solving the problem of sustainability and filming to like flying to all these locations and all that stuff, but it's also creatively what he can do to help, be quite innovative in his approach and consider that in script.
I was going to ask also, extending from that, are there enough crew to handle the technology? Because obviously it's such a new space. Are we going to require training for crew members?
Absolutely. I mean, while there is not enough panels and people have to wait to get enough panels, that is not nearly as large as the shortage of people who have done it. As James said, we're not experts either. Like in many cases, we're doing it the first or second time, and that makes you an expert at this point. And so really there needs to be as many opportunities. Warner Media's partnering with the NFTS. We're sort of trying to find opportunities to get people access, because once you get your hands on a machine or you get your hands on a camera, whatever sort of is drawing you into this, I mean, the other piece that is the biggest shortage is the content that goes up on the screen. Yeah. So we'll have loads of screens, but until we have loads of people who can make content worthy of filming on those screens, it's sort of, that'll be another place where you'll have thousands of people in the virtual art department constructing that scene, and then you'll have 10, 15 people on that set actually operating it. So that's where the largest sort of opportunity is.
Yeah, if you are a school leaver or you have children who are at school leaving age, learn Unreal Engine. You will never be out of a job. You'll be well paid.
Absolutely. But also if you are interested in this space and you are like a established filmmaker, there's organisations like Screen Skills that are really, really, are going out there and setting up facilities, or working with us as well to bring you into the studio and keep an eye out for those kind of organisations, because I think they're the ones that we're leaning on to try to get talent coming in, but also trying to make the access point not as high as it seems to be, because it's a really interesting tool when it comes to telling stories.
And Angus, has it been relatively straightforward to adjust to the virtual world?
Yes, I think so. It's been made very easy by Ryan and his team, definitely. And as you've probably been getting a sense of, we've had a tremendous luxury in our schedule to do it. Yeah, I think there's a few little interesting sort of little quirks and sort of things you have to deal with. You go in sort of prepared for certain issues, and then they sort of evaporate, and different ones come up. But it has been pretty easy, I think. I think one of our biggest, one of the interesting areas is the space on V Stage at Leavesden is very similar to what probably everyone has a sense of has been done on the TV series The Mandalorian, which means it's about 8 meters high wall, 25 foot, and it's essentially an oval shape, which is about 70 feet wide by about 85 feet long. And what's interesting is that adapting your mindset to not building oval sets. So because you don't have to, you look at the space and you keep thinking you have to sort of build around this oval space, but you don't. It can be a big square hall that you're shooting in. It's just, the screen is just designed to be a wraparound like that, just to optimize for, wherever you want to point the camera. But that's the thing that I think is going to be interesting, and it's going to take new talent, I think, as well, that are going to see the opportunities, because I would readily admit that initially it takes you a moment to sort of break down, and look at it and not look at the space and feel that that's defines what you have to do.
And broadening out beyond technology, Lisa, I think you touched on this. Sustainability obviously is a key topic still for the industry. Could this be a game changer on that front too, do you think?
I think so. I read this week that on a typical tentpole feature budget of 54 million, that production will produce 2,800 tonnes of CO2. And with virtual production, you have the opportunity to, I guess you don't have to travel to as many locations. You don't have those diesel generators on locations that you're set to. I think there's obvious benefits for sustainability that absolutely should be considered and are really, really important now.
Ryan, did you want to come in there too? I know sustainability is key to Warner Brothers Studios.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first and most obvious thing is just the size of the set. So if we were to build some of these sets, they would go for ages, and they would, take months to construct. And now a large part of that is produced by people far away on a computer, possibly even at home. And then what we're building inside of the stage is, at some cases I'd say it's probably like a tenth of what would have to be built if we were to build that thing for real. And that's really, in addition to that, we're not traveling the crew to faraway lands. We're doing it right there.
James, did you want to make a point on that? You good? Okay, and finally on diversity, another key topic. How diverse is the industry at the moment? Do you think more should and could be done? James, do you want to start there?
Yeah, but there is definitely, like at an artist level in visual effects, there are more men than women. I mean, we do have on 1899 our virtual production supervisor and producer are both women, which is fantastic. We're actively looking for more opportunities to promote within the business for that. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's something that I think that we need to look at. I think government needs to look at it at like an education level, at a school level, that that people can see that this is a growing industry, and there's opportunity there, across the board.
Angus, you wanted to come in there?
I'm not being complacent about it at all, but I would say noticeably on this production, this is anecdotal. I can't give you any figures, but I would say I see a greater gender diversity, definitely. But I think that's just embraced by the filmmakers and the studio. It's advocated by the studio, obviously, but it's embraced by the filmmakers just for a better environment generally. And I do also think that with this new technology, this is the opportunity, because there are going to be new young talents who are going to embrace these technologies, and that this is the way to bring in diversity as well.
Brilliant. Finally, before we open up to questions from you guys, where do you see the virtual production landscape heading in the coming months and years? How do you see it changing considerably? Ryan, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, the two pieces that I see changing the most considerably is just as Angus was talking about, sort of an oval shape. The part that is easy to forget, but hopefully, everyone's going to see more and more, is you can look at that scene ahead of time with a lens, and you can, sort of refine it that way. But also, you can produce final content. You could pick out visual effects shots or do a completely animated feature rendered in real time. And I think those merging of the animation process and the traditional production process, physical, sort of moving of cameras, as those two pieces come closer and closer together, I think it's just going to afford an opportunity to be flexible that wasn't previously there. You just have to wait for a render and then see what it looks like, and that sort of being erased.
James, you?
I mean, it's a ways off now because it's going to take so much planning, but I'd love to see like a world where we're creating content, in a linear story structure that we're shooting, but you're doing it using assets that can be repurposed immediately for game engines, and so you can be watching the show while you're actually interacting with it. That there's the opportunity to explore those worlds and have like an interactive role within them. As well as watching the linear content.
Lisa?
Sorry, I was just dreaming about that. I think the more creatives we get into a volume, I think that's going to start to produce really innovative visions that we haven't seen before. And so the more confidence people have to take that risk and then see, and especially I love the collaborations going on between creative teams that we were talking about that don't normally speak. The more they speak, what can they come up with? What can they vision? That's what I'm really excited about. At Mars, we've got a documentary, we've got a commercial, we've got a game, we've got all different types. And the more those industries cross, I think we're going to get some really exciting visions out of that.
Fantastic. Angus, finally?
Yeah, I think also I think Lisa's team may be involved in some of this as well. Is that we're trying to do photoreal environments and sets, but of course you don't have to do photoreal environments and sets. And I was talking about this the other day with one of the directors, and one of my favourite scenes is from Vertigo. When James Stewart first kisses Kim Novak, and they're in front of a rear projection screen, and Hitchcock rotated the environment. They're on a turntable, and he rotated the environment around them. It's a creative tool. It's there to be explored. It doesn't have to just be for photoreal set extensions. It could be used in all sorts of different ways.
So volume came, I think for the most part, motion capture was traditionally, they would call that a volume. And what they meant by that is basically a square, and then there's the third dimension, which is up. And so that area, that rectangle that Avatar, for example, was filmed inside of was their volume. And now when they went and took that same technology but put an LED screen around it, it was still a volume because the motion capture was the area where you could track the camera.
The amount of time that you need to test and to prep and to pre-light, and how that factors into a traditional schedule where people haven't done this kind of thing before, and they have an expectation of how quickly they can move things along. And until you actually get in there and you see the amount of time that it takes to, is we have to go through a thing called a pre-light phase, where you basically, once you've optimized an environment, you've built it in the virtual art department, you've sent it to the guys who are running what's called a brain bar, which is there's sort of 10 seats, or 8 to 10 seats, that control the delivery of the real-time content to the screen. So you need to basically optimize that environment to get it to play in real time. And once you've got it to the point where it's working, you bring your DP in, and you go through what's called a pre-light phase, where he says, okay, for this environment, we're going to be doing magic hour, and so we're going to put the sun here, and we're going to have this kind of key light and fill light, and blah, 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 and you get the environment to a point where it looks right, and then you go and you pre-render that, so all of the shadows and everything are baked in, and then you can basically, you can project it in real time, and it looks photorealistic. It's not, if you were actually like using a game engine, this is right, Ryan? Right? Correct. I am correct. If you were using a game engine and you were doing, you know how game engine doesn't look real? Like you play a video game, it looks sort of real, but it doesn't look completely real. Why this looks real is because we're pre-rendering all of the shadows into it. Right, so you need to go through that process where you decide where the lights are going to be, you pre-render everything, and then you basically take that pre-rendered textured environment and you're stuck with it. That's what you work with when you shoot on the day. And that takes time and thought and decision-making ahead of time to be able to do that. And it's just it's a new paradigm that filmmakers need to get used to. It's not so much complaints, it's just... Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like the complaint or sort of the shift of working that you're talking about is if I move a practical light, I just move it and the shadows start casting in that direction, right? Like that's the sort of, or if I move a chair, I just move it. But if it's in the screen, there are implications based on how you've built that scene. Now you can photograph a game engine scene and it can work and look photoreal, but even then you may have made compromises. So you may have, to get the frame rate so that the camera can track with it, you may have made it so that the lighting isn't dynamic. If you make it so that the lighting's dynamic, it either might work at a lower frame rate, so your image will stutter a little bit, or it just will not look as photoreal as when you pre-render it, essentially, and you bake that stuff in. And so that decision-making process is a learning curve, because previously, move lamp, shadow changes where it goes, and we need to sort of, well, I think the game engine, even in the next few years, that'll be also a huge change, is that process will start to mirror the two, and you won't have all this pre-rendering.
I think the other thing too, as part of that whole process, it's not just the DP and getting the lighting right. A lot of it is like working with the production designer and the art director to get the foreground set looking right, and having that foreground set like finished when you get to your pre-light stage, because you need to basically be lighting everything. You're not just lighting the environment on the wall, you're lighting the foreground set as well, and that's part of the illusion. Like when you're standing in a volume, you can see that there's the foreground set and there's a great big television screen there that wraps around everything, and it doesn't look real. And if you go and you look through the monitors and you see what's happening in the camera, the illusion is incredible. You can't get that illusion between the perfect blend between what you've got on the screens and what's happening in your foreground set, unless you've got your foreground set. So all of that needs to be designed ahead of time, built, brought in. Like there's just it's a process that involves a lot of input.
Go, Angus. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not really best qualified to answer this, but obviously the Unreal operators and the Unreal artists are the obvious answer. So that is not only, I think the post houses, or the houses that are creating the content, are working in a number of different ways. They're often the art department's working in their favorite software. They then export that to the post house. The post house then builds and makes environments in their favorite software. Then it has to be imported into Unreal and optimized in Unreal. So artists, who are fluent in Unreal will always be being sought after. Then there are the actual Unreal TDs who actually work on the stage and actually manage the playback of those environments on the set, and they need to. In our case, they've been interacting a lot with the artists who've created the content, because in our case, a visual effects house created the content. They've had a lot of interesting backwards and forwards dialogue, about optimizing the playback. So that is the obvious answer, I think. I think Ryan, I don't know if there's anything to do with creating these spaces, the actual physical making of the spaces and the running of them. I don't know if that's a...
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly sort of the design of these systems is beyond the complex. And so people who are in, those who have done large stadiums, rock concerts, those sort of things, there's now an opportunity to shift into a different world and solve a different set of problems. And I think to each of those things where we're really grabbing people from other sectors, the key is that they start to speak the language of all those who have been there before. So it's having roles and experience so that you can talk to the gaffer or talk to the production designer and understand sort of what problems they're facing and help them with your experience with either video routing or a game engine solve that problem for them, because it's really the listening and sort of understanding what those requests are that's sometimes the biggest challenge.
I think. Sorry, go.
Go.
Sorry, please.
One of the roles I think we will need more are reskilling or upskilling first ADs on set, because it's a whole new ball game in terms of stakeholders, in terms of moving forward the process, and I think that's and also understanding what needs to happen in order to manage everyone's expectations on a shoot day, especially on the lower budget projects. I think that's going to be, for first ADs to understand what goes into the volume and what needs to happen compared to what they're used to, I think is going to be very, very important.
Fantastic.
And
James, go ahead.
Just the role yet to be determined as to like how necessary this is, or whether it's like unnecessary, like treading on toes. But I think that there's potential room there for a virtual art director as a new role that sits between the virtual art department and the traditional production designer and art director on a show. In a way, like we've been lumped with this term virtual art department, it's really more like a virtual construction department is what's happening. That's where art department will design the sets and they'll give them to the Unreal guys and you will construct that. And really we need like a virtual art director or a virtual construction director, somebody who will like have that interface continually with the production designer to make sure that everything is just so.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. We're going to end it there, but thank you to the panel. It's been great. Thanks to you for attending.